help to create those successes and also maybe ways that you can take advantage of some of those resources. So we have a great panel with us today. I'm going to introduce them briefly and then give them a few minutes to kind of give you their spiel so you know where they're coming from. And then we have some questions prepared ahead of time, but we would love to know what you're here to learn about. So feel free at any time to just shoot your hand up and pose a question. So we'll start with Olga Stella. Olga is the Vice President for Business Development at the DEGC, the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation. And in her role there, she leads business attraction, retention, and expansion efforts on behalf of the City of Detroit, and has also worked in policy development, special initiatives, strategic partnerships, and project management. Next to Olga, we have Chris Yule with PNC. His clientele consists of privately held entrepreneurial companies ranging from 10 to 50 million in revenues. And today he is here as a representative of the Green Garage. Chris was part of the team that worked to form the business greenhouse incubator at the Green Garage. And next to Chris, we have Scott Griffin, who's a principal at Ramsdale Inc. out of New York. They're a real estate development firm with a focus on community building, and Scott is also an owner of what was at one time known as the Lincoln Brass Works Foundry. So some exciting projects to talk about. With that, Olga, if you want to start.
Sure. I guess we're just going to start with a quick overview of what our organization does. So the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation is a nonprofit economic development agency. It focuses on the city of Detroit, and it staffs the city's public redevelopment authorities. So it's Downtown Development Authority, Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, Economic Development Corporation, a number of other tax increment finance authorities. We try to be the one door to economic development that a business person or a real estate developer or investor needs to find, so that we can then connect them to other resources or connect them to these different public authorities. In many other cities in Michigan, you have to go to a bunch of different places. And we recognize that in the city of Detroit, the perception can be that it's difficult to do business or hard to figure things out. So at least on the economic development side, we try on a high level to create that one portal. But we aren't the only agency in the city that works with businesses or works on real estate projects. There is a rich ecosystem of organizations either providing startup services and acceleration services like TechTown or Next Energy, to more place-based groups like the Northeast Business Association or Southwest Detroit Business Association, or Midtown Detroit Incorporated, which is really focused on businesses and real estate projects in their geographic areas. The finance groups, I know someone here today from the Detroit Micro Enterprise Fund or Invest Detroit. There's a number of different kind of financial intermediaries that work with businesses in the city. So it's a pretty strong community. And what we try to do at DEGC is, from a macro perspective, work on cluster development for different economic clusters that we think are important to the city's future, work with both existing businesses and new businesses we're trying to bring in, and work with our partners in the community to try to get these deals done and to create areas of density and to really strengthen the opportunities for both residents and businesses that are located in the city. And so we've worked on things from everything from Quicken Loans coming downtown, which is gets all the headlines and it's a very, very important project. And then Hotel at Hotel, and the 22 layers of financing that it took to make that work. To food processing companies that employ 50 people located in Eastern Market, or metal manufacturer on the east side. So we work with a wide variety of businesses. The one thing that we don't do is provide technical services to startups. We really rely on our partners in the city and in the region to do that, whether it's Auto Alley or Next Energy or TechTown.
Done?
Yes.
Sweet. All right. And so Chris Yule, again, PNC Bank guy today. Happy to, as we get into question and answer, kind of, address anything from that lens. But here today wearing my Green Garage hat. And for those of you that don't know what the Green Garage is, I'll start with, how they say it right on the website, or how we say it. It's really three things. It's a building in Midtown Detroit. It's a community of folks, built around that building, and the folks inside that building looking to build a sustainable future and to grow companies with a triple bottom line focus. And also, it's an incubator, again, looking to grow those businesses, looking to resource them correctly. I wear many different hats at the Green Garage. Started, not necessarily with the building. I'm not a technical guy from that respect, but the building itself is amazing. 100-year-old former Model T showroom, National Historic Register building that was completely repurposed, in very green ways. The one stat that always stands out to me on that is it's going to cost $300 a year to heat and cool this 13,000 square foot building. And it was renovated, largely utilizing materials out of the U.S. waste stream, things that would have otherwise gone to the to landfills. In places like that. And it was really done by a community of individuals, getting to the community part where Tom Brennan and his wife Peggy, who owned the building, opened their doors and said, we want to make this a deep experiment in sustainability and a model around the world. Now how the heck do we go about doing that? And really it was hundreds of people coming in, working on the building. It's up and open. My role, again, it's an incubator. I worked on forming that incubator, started about 2 years ago. We were trying to benchmark globally what is an incubator, how do they work, how do we measure an incubator, then how do we make an incubator that grows bottom line, triple bottom line businesses. We could get into it, I won't get into all the detail now, but we found there's a lot of fundamental flaws out there with incubators and a lot of these types of programs. And we're trying to address them in the way we look to grow businesses. And that's fundamentally, again, what we're trying to do. We're not trying to grow business plans. We're not trying to grow investment pitches. We're trying to grow businesses. We're trying to grow them naturally. And I think that that's a very important distinction to make. And then again, the community that's built up around the building itself, around the entrepreneurs that we're housing in the building, is invaluable. It's what we need to do to help turn around Detroit. It's starting in Midtown and downtown and places like that, and we're gaining, we're enveloping these entrepreneurs and others in kind of a deep cocoon of resources, helping them out and trying to grow communities. So that's fundamentally what we're doing.
Great. Hello everyone, my name is Scott Griffin. I came to Detroit about 1.5 years ago to start off with when my company formed a working agreement with the Maroon family to redevelop Michigan Central Station, which I'm very happy to report is well underway and going wonderfully. When I began to really look at the market in Detroit and look at what I saw the future of that to be, I quickly saw that there were incredible inefficiencies in the real estate market and the labor markets that I felt could create real value, either for myself, for investors, or in some way to be redirected towards the community. As I began to really study the market and understand, I began to really see that there was a tremendous need for capacity building in the communities, that there was a lack of examples of people who had brought businesses from an idea stage to reality, from the page to the stage is what I would say in the showbiz world. And that examples were needed. And around the same time that I began to think about these various things, my business partner, Angel Gambino, was obviously a doll. And I found a large building, 100,000 square foot commercial building in Corktown, which we are actively redeveloping into house local retail, community services, to really make it an anchor building for the Corktown community. We are also actively acquiring other properties as well, but our focus is strictly on how can the community, if we have a municipal government that does not have the financial ability to sustain these communities, what tools does the community have within its own reach, within its own grasp, to build its own education and productive capacities to become functioning citizens? So we're actively meeting with tenants, with young renters, with everyone who's trying to go from the cottage food world into the world of retail, to expand the retail they have into a larger space, into a better market, into a this, and to really assess, using my experience in business, to really understand where their businesses are, how to help things grow, and to try to provide some kind of middle ground of an example and support to be more than just a landlord.
Great, well thank you very much for the thorough introduction, everyone. What I would love to start with is something happening in Detroit that you are most excited about, and also what you think is the one thing that entrepreneurs should be most excited about happening in Detroit.
You want to start with me?
Okay.
the one thing in Detroit that I'm most excited about, there is such, I've been in this role at DGC now for 4 years, and I worked there for 5 years, and it's my second tour of duty there, so this iteration for 5 years. And when I came back, we were going through a lot of kind of changes, political changes, the auto industry collapse, terrible foreclosure crisis. So it just felt like every time you're kind of getting things going again, the rug got pulled out from underneath you and things were set back. And even now with some of the issues around the city's financial condition, there is just such a positive energy. And so really the power of all of individuals who are doing things, whether it's the Great Garage opening or Scott buying the building and rehabbing it, or what Dan Gilbert is doing. There's an announcement today that they're pretty close on closing on the Federal Reserve building, which has been vacant for 5 or 6 years. And it was supposed to be a housing project, and the housing market collapsed, and now it's going to be something else. And you start to see the beginnings of private investment happening without a whole lot of we're not begging for it. People are coming because they see that there's a value, see that there's a real opportunity. They're investing their dollars, and we're starting to have that. And that is just the tidal wave of that is really happening. And it makes it really easy to go to work every day, because that phone is going to keep ringing. And it's been every year we've had kind of a doubling in the active projects that we've been working on. So it feels really, there's a lot of positive energy, and it's really fueled not by any one person. It's not the governor or it's not the government or any one bank. It's all of these, not just Dan Gilbert, it's all of these individuals who are doing things. And you can really start to feel that whole energy.
Yeah, I think that's how I always describe to folks, is the energy in Detroit is amazing right now. As we were driving out here, we were talking about, I think there's an opportunity in Detroit that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. When you layer on the guts that we have there, the energy flowing in there, and the capacity we have to grow businesses and create wealth, frankly. So, I like the energy, and I love the interconnectedness of all of us kind of working on the city. There's people from multiple backgrounds, people that probably historically in places like Detroit did not get together. Now we're all kind of finding this common cause of reinventing Detroit, reinventing the entrepreneurial ecosystem in the city, and looking forward to growing it with an eye towards the future.
Well, I'll be the odd man out. To speak frankly, in terms of what is the one thing in Detroit right now that I'm most excited about, or the opportunity that I think entrepreneurs should be excited about, with all due respect to the many people whose jobs this may affect, I'm the most excited about a chapter filing or an emergency financial manager. I think that the placement of an individual in that kind of role, it has the possibility of creating extraordinary opportunities for the investor, for the entrepreneur. I think that on a strictly land-holding basis alone, urgent action is required. As to what that opportunity looks like, it could be many different things depending on how they act, but the really important question I think that I as an entrepreneur want to really assess and learn for myself is, are these going to be opportunities that are creating wealth for a few, or are these once-in-a-lifetime opportunities that can really change a city forever to where everyone can benefit? So clearly I'm a businessman. I like money as much as the next guy. But we are really in a pivotal position right now in this country. I mean, everyone talks about Detroit being the first post-industrial city, the first industrial city to fail. I see it quite differently. I see this as that this is the opportunity for us to really make groundbreaking examples to be the first city to succeed.
Right.
Because irrespective of whether it was the first industrial city to fail, it's not the last. It's going to happen all over the place. So the decisions that we make here, if we can really be wise and carefully think about our communities and the long-range future of these things, these types of calamitous events can actually create tremendous positive motion.
Great. Now you all three have worked with companies, worked with entrepreneurs, which I'm assuming the better portion of our audience would fall into that category today. So Can you share some insights with the group based on your experiences with those entrepreneurs, whether it be areas where they had terrific success and did everything right, or made some pretty terrible blunders and learned from those experiences? What are some of those insights that you can pass on? She's our first this time.
You want me to go
Yes,
first?
we'll rotate.
She knows the hard questions coming next, so.
You know, I guess I look at, when I look at entrepreneurs, I look at it from two ways. I look at my customer base, again, in my day job, who are folks that have been doing business and, you know, for multiple decades, often passed down those businesses to multiple generations of their family, and have been very successful with it. So I get to learn from them about how they did it. And then I look at all the folks trying to start businesses and their viewpoint on it. I think, you know, society in general right now has such a kind of a short time frame. You know, if I need to do this, you know, within the next 3 months to find success. I'd say most of these businesses, what they tell me is they grew it wisely over time. They started small, they surrounded themselves by good people, and built it over multiple decades, not multiple quarters. And I think that that's the perspective, that's a very healthy perspective to take, and I think that that gets missed a lot if you look at the mistakes being made in the startup community, early stage community, whatever it may be.
I mean, I think the thing that I see most prevalent in here in this part of the country, in New York, it's a bit of a different problem, but it's a similar thing, is that I see that people have a type of magical thinking around whatever piece it is that they lack, so that many people feel that the lack of capital, or if we had capital, then we would have all of our problems solved. If the bank would lend in this format, then we would be solvent, then it would be that. That people tend to, I mean, I don't mean to generalize, but I mean, I've seen a fair amount of this, that this missing piece becomes this kind of focus that takes away from the rest of the developing business. And what that leads to as time goes on is a lack of analysis of what the real core issues are. Because perhaps the lack of capital or its ready availability has to do with a core issue in the structure of your business that is really being addressed. So this kind of silver bullet mentality of if I only had this, then everything would be perfect, is very prevalent among many people that I talk to. Because I'm the kind of guy that I just go, okay, this is a huge mess, where do we start? And just start chipping away, knowing that these problems are always, that there is no silver bullet ever. So.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with both of the comments that Chris and Scott made. And maybe just from a more Detroit perspective, I think often people kind of come to organizations like ours or the county or whoever, and they're like, okay, I'm ready to open a business in Detroit. I have no money. I can't really tell you who my customer is going to be, but I'm going to create. And literally, someone told me they're going to create 2,000 jobs, but they have no money. And there's not really, and they're kind of like, okay, so tell me what the incentives are, and it's not this kind of creative problem solving around. This is realistically where I am in the business. You know, the city is desperate, so you will do whatever it takes, and we're evaluating businesses. And entrepreneurs just the same way that a bank might or a prospective landlord might, because if we're giving our attention to any one business in the community or a business that might be coming into the community, we need to make sure that is actually going to yield results, because we have limited human resources and a pretty big unemployment problem. So it's I think sometimes folks kind of approach maybe some of the sources of assistance with a little bit of an entitlement mentality, and I think some of the the groups like ours would really rather engage in a kind of this creative problem solving.
So to that point, what are some, do you have suggestions for entrepreneurs as to what that creative problem solving looks like? Because obviously the need for capital is not something that's going to go away in people's minds, even in Detroit and other urban areas. So what do you see as some ways that they could, are there programs that they could take advantage of, or have you seen strategies work with other companies that they could consider?
I think this is my turn to go first. Right? I think that some simple answers without getting into the nuances of programs and things like that. One of the things that I'm amazed by when I talk to entrepreneurs, for instance, I have a great interest in the mobile food industry and food trucks. Obviously, there's an incredible demand for that in the city of Detroit, and there's an incredible lack of supply. So there's market opportunity. When I began to talk to individuals who were looking at doing food trucks, all of whom were experienced chefs or who had owned or worked in restaurants, who had access to usually more than half of the capital that was needed. When I would get into these conversations with each of them, they were all, what I was amazed by is that each of them, as the exact same problem, which is how do you go through the permitting process of 5 state and city agencies in order to get the accreditation that you need. So to me, the amount of duplicated effort is really astonishing. If we could really foster more of a community to where people are really sharing ideas and people who are trying to achieve what may at first seem like competitive aims, these are actually complementary aims. The idea that there is radical competition in a market like Detroit, we're just not there yet. You know what I mean? We should be grateful for whatever we can get. But if we could consolidate that, if we could minimize that duplicated effort on solving the same problems by even 20%, you would see rapid growth. Rapid growth.
Yeah, let me kind of piggyback off that. So, I think, one of the big problems is this kind of insular mentality of the entrepreneurs. I'm working on whatever in my basement. It's the world's greatest idea. I don't want anybody to know about it. But if you just open it up and ask for help, there's going to be sources out there. I know that we've kind of taken this whole open source approach, even with what we created at the Green Garage. Everything we did is on a wiki page. We'd love to share it with the world, learn from it. And I think more often than not, the entrepreneurs benefit from that, because if you haven't quite gotten there yet, you don't quite know who to ask for help. So just kind of put out the bat signal. And there's plenty of programs in town, and certain programs are right for certain people. But I think it's rather than you just going around and knocking on all those doors, it's literally put it out there, look to connect to people, and don't be afraid to share your ideas, share your strengths, and share your weaknesses, because someone out there is going to be able to plug in and help you out.
And the organizations are becoming more and more connected. So, as long as you get to one of those places, whether it's a Detroit Creative Corridor Center, or it's Tech Town First Friday, or it's just one of these places, if you can have the conversation in a problem-solving sort of way, even if you didn't go to the right place, the folks in Detroit who work with businesses are becoming more and more connected, and I think that will start to, some of those barriers will start to break down. And I think it's, there's some interesting models. Like there's a thing downtown called D-Hive that's just starting up. And it's really about, not so much about taking people through like a formal class or training program, but really about trying to help individuals who have ideas start to figure out how to build out those ideas, whether they're social enterprises or business enterprises. And it goes back to that connectivity piece and the exchange of ideas, because someone else might have solved your problem.
One of the things, as I say, Scott and I got to drive out here together, so we're discussing a lot of different things, but realize the power of, a guy like him, or, what do I have to offer businesses? My most powerful tool is my Rolodex. And the ability to say, man, I don't know how the heck to help you here, but I know 2 or 3 people that might be able to at least move you forward. And I think, again, just knowing that, connecting all of us, is a very beneficial thing.
Scott, you mentioned food trucks as something that could be kind of an up-and-coming trend in the city of Detroit. Are there other, whether they be industry-specific or innovation-specific trends that any of you see existing or sort of on the horizon that entrepreneurs should be on the lookout for?
Well, just start with the obvious. Real estate. This is a town of very, very low-level real estate development. Anybody that really knows the world of real estate can come in here and see that there are tremendous opportunities. So if anyone is interested in real estate, I think that this is a key time, and I think in the next few years it's only going to get better. And I don't think the return on investment is nearly the long tail that it once was. I see that as a very, very strong sign. I'm amazed when I talk to real estate developers here at how limited the vision is. It is obviously incredibly property specific because some of these properties just don't work. They don't cash flow, they just don't work. But there are many amazing finds out there that can create substantial value for investors.
Yeah, and we try to focus at the Green Garage on not being industry specific or anything like that. It's, if you're pointed true north on building a triple line, bottom line business, we're going to help you out. But I think one thing that Detroit has, we're good at making stuff. I mean, we don't, let's not try to be Silicon Valley or Boston or whatever. We have great engineers in this town. We have immeasurable knowledge in the automotive supply base, people who've just been making great things for years. And I encourage entrepreneurs to try to connect to that knowledge because we're better at making things, making tangible products than anybody on this planet. And so that's what I look to embrace.
Yeah, I would say, I think the food piece is really going to be really big for Detroit. It is a big sector in the city already, and you get both ends of the spectrum. You get really big food processors who are growing in the city, and you also get micro entrepreneurs who are doing some cool things. And I think there's going to be such an energy around food-related businesses, whether they're processors or retailers, that's going to be something you're going to see more and more of. I also think green is a real opportunity, and I know it can be really trendy, but in a place like Detroit where there is you see all of the ways our old economy failed, whether it's through environmental contamination or just kind of vacancy. The way the Green Garage was developed, using products out of the waste stream. I think there's a real opportunity to experiment in some things. Even lighting technologies, how do you light large parts of the city where the traditional grid system may not function any longer? I think there's just a lot of that opportunity to test new technologies, new ways of doing things that incorporate sustainability, because Detroit's a perfect testing ground for that kind of stuff. And other cities, to Scott's point, other cities around the world are going to suffer similar problems or could use those technologies going forward. So I think that's a real opportunity. And then the last thing I would say in general is whatever you do in Detroit, if you do it, well, actually, no, I'll say two more things, sorry. So creative sectors, I mean, there are, to the point on making stuff, we also know how to design stuff, and there are really smart systems people.
Design culture, yeah.
Unbelievable, and it's kind of underground, people don't really realize it, but the center of it really is the College for Creative Studies, and just people who can do graphic design and product design and just systems design, so I think that's something that's really underappreciated talent base in the city. And the last thing that I'll say is that honestly, whatever you do in Detroit, as long as you do it extremely well, you will be successful.
I agree completely.
People shortchange us on quality because they think we're desperate, and what they find is Detroiters are just as picky as people anywhere else. So if you're going to open a retail establishment or redevelop a building, just have an eye for design, have an eye for customer service, for quality, and because there aren't enough establishments, and there's so much demand. We talk a lot about Slow's Barbecue. It's good food. Is it the best barbecue in America? Probably not, right? It's really good food, and I love the Cooley brothers. They're friends of mine. But what they did well is they had really good food in a beautifully designed space with great customer service. And they didn't just capture the people who lived in that neighborhood. They had folks in, fur coats coming down from West Bloomfield to eat, barbecue. And a part of the city, I'm a Detroiter, and a part of the city when I first moved to Detroit, you didn't go past the White Castle. We never would have gone to that block 12 years ago. And, 6 years ago, my boss's stepmother was coming down in her Porsche to eat food there. So, if you have a quality experience, people will come from all over to appreciate it in the city.
I want to loop back around to one of the things Olga said. So, obviously talking about green and that future. I think one thing we try to think about too is, if we say green, it doesn't mean you have to be out there trying to manufacture solar panels.
Right.
It means figure out a way to more efficiently use your resources for whatever business you're in. I think there's immense opportunity there because in a world of finite resources, those resources are continuing to get more expensive. And if you can figure out ways to use them correctly, you're automatically going to have a competitive advantage. So there's ways for existing industries to be much more efficient. And I think that people out there that can figure that out have a very prosperous future.
Scott, I have a question specifically for you. You have a unique perspective in that you're familiar with the city of Detroit, owning a building here, but your firm is in New York City, and so you kind of, I think, get the vibe from both places. And I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on, outside urban areas view of Detroit, because I think, being a local, we're so used to the media being primarily negative, and, everyone thinks we're desperate and there's no hope.
Well, I'll answer that in a couple of different ways. Number one.
Can I add another question? Kind of an addendum to that. And why Detroit? There are a lot of cities out there that are desperate besides Detroit, Pittsburgh, at one point, not so much in Detroit, but Dayton, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio, they're all desperate.
Yeah, they just don't have the infrastructure of the city like Detroit.
So it was the infrastructure then?
Well, investment in infrastructure can't be undervalued. That's a key, you've got a major international trade crossing, you've got incredible freeways, you've got good rail systems, both on the Canadian and the US side. That infrastructure is incredibly valuable.
Fresh water.
Excuse me?
And fresh water.
And fresh water, absolutely. Right. But to answer your question, I want to say first, to go back to the issue of opportunity. Here's a challenge, okay? Somebody wants to find a great opportunity. Here's your biggest opportunity in the city. The city has the worst media of any city in the entire world. I don't know who these reporters are, I don't know who these editors are, but I got to tell you, it makes the Politburo look like the Huffington Post. These people set these editorial agendas and they follow them irrespective of facts, irrespective of basic logic. I read these newspapers about meetings that I have been in and I go, well, that's not what happened. Well, what is that? So, somebody wants to get into a media-related business, you're going to have tremendous success because there are hundreds of thousands of readers out there who feel the same way that I do, I promise you. So what do I see as an outsider coming in from New York? I see that this city is very much like what New York used to be like when I first moved there in the early 90s, around 1990. And before that in the 80s as well. Where, without being overly, artsy-fartsy about the whole thing, that there's room. There's room for your idea. There's room for your idea. There's room for all of these companies to grow and flourish. And there's also, apart from there being room for these ideas to develop, there also is not a cutthroat real estate economy that is completely undermining the growth of business. So when we look at New York as an example, a city that I love, my office space, which is a nice office space, is $15,000 a month. The landlord wanted to raise the rent, sued us, went into litigation. We offered to pay $25,000 a month. And it wasn't enough. How can a business succeed in an environment, a real estate environment like that? It can't. So when you see in New York, you see, also because of our mayor in there, Michael Bloomberg, who's the worst mayor in America, I don't care what anybody says, you see the tax dollars subsidizing big box stores to take dollars out of the local community to holding companies in Bermuda or wherever, and you see neighborhoods being destroyed. It's not just gentrification, it's a corporate gentrification that is destroying these local economies that were for many years incredibly vibrant. So what do I see when I come to Detroit? I see that you haven't got any of that. You don't have a competitive real estate environment. You have big box stores who don't want to go anywhere near the city, which I think is fantastic news. And you have room for people's ideas to grow and develop, flourish without these unfair or unrealistic competitive disadvantages.
We're gonna pause our predetermined questions for the moment and open it up because we, as a panel, we're really excited to hear what you want to know more about, so.
Well, Scott, I appreciate what you just said with that perspective of New York, but how do we, I mean, part of what all of you are saying and what we're here is this whole branding of Detroit, and perhaps we owe a lot to the Super Bowl commercial of Chrysler making Detroit a little bit more in, and we want to pick up on that, but how do we, two aspects. I mean, I do mobile apps here in Ann Arbor. I'd like to have a foothold in Detroit, but attracting sustainable talent is a challenge. I mean, you can go to Midtown and find students who can work, but next semester, different schedule, et cetera. So one is the talent challenge, to have real sustainable talent. And secondly, what you alluded to about how do we ensure that the policies will be in place that, I mean, with all due respect to the economic growth, the way Whole Foods came in and they got the red carpet treatment, whereas these other grocers were there growing more organically and doing the fighting. How do we watch out for that undermining that could potentially come down?
I can address both of those issues.
Okay.
So, well, first of all, the Whole Foods project is part of a larger grocery store strategy. And the 80 independent grocers in the city of Detroit have had access to, we've worked with, over a dozen of stores that are already in the city. And I think that, when you think about the grocery sector development and, what have Detroit residents said to us, what they want is quality and diversity of options and being able to provide that. None of the independent grocers in the city that we talked to were about to change their formats to remove processed sugars and hydrogenated fats, right? So, Whole Foods is a very particular kind of specialty store, and to be able to kind of to create some diversity in the market and frankly to create the kind of brand recognition for the city. That store opening or store announcement was their #1 store announcement in their whole history outside of their first store in New York City. Got us more, I'm sorry?
Right by my apartment.
Right. Got us more phone calls from private real estate developers wanting to develop housing than the 5 or 6 independent stores that we had worked with before who were doing incremental things. So, it takes all of it, and it's not any one thing. Meyer is going to open 2 stores in the city, and it takes all of it to be able to have a fully functioning city.
I mean, with all due respect, there were more than 5-6 stores, and it took Mike Finney coming down from MEDC to put, I mean, either we have that stretch.
No, that's actually, I know there's a story out there, but the reality is that we started working with independent grocers well before we ever talked to Whole Foods, well before. It just works slower, and the outcomes of it are different. And it's not to
But
say
how
that.
do we assure that, I mean, for instance, Scott is taking this big potential, great story in Cranes, the ground floor retail and not the branded and upstairs more office mixed use. How do we, either we go like the China model where they just plump down and say this is the tech building, this is the green garage building, this is the healthcare building, and these are the sectors, or we at least loosely coordinate so we can have a win-win situation. I mean, for instance, I'm a t-shirt manufacturer, I go to Scott's building, I'm moving forward, and all of a sudden, you know what, we're going to make the mall across the road because Macy's is ready to throw it in, and boom, now I'm...
So there's a couple things. One of the things that's happening is the city's actually going through a strategic planning process. So some of those pensions will, it's called the Detroit Works Project Long-Term Plan. And there's a website, you can just go to DetroitWorksProject.com. They're actually engaging in a data-driven long-term planning process. The city's master plan hasn't been updated. I mean, it's gone through incremental updates, but if you compare the master plans over the last 50 years, they're basically the same. And so I think this question of how development happens and where is a community conversation that is starting and needs to be ongoing. But I think that, kind of to the point of how do you keep things open so that people don't get priced out of the market? I mean, the real estate economics in Detroit mostly don't work. I think a lot of the time you really need to have folks like Scott who have some wherewithal, who are buying buildings that don't have a financing gap of $10 million.
How did New York evolve with Battery Park and Greenwich Village? How did they keep that ethos without curving everyone out?
They didn't, it's gone. The whole neighborhood is gentrified. Rents on Bleecker Street are $550 a square foot. The average rent on an apartment in that neighborhood for a studio apartment is $4,500 a month.
Where do you think that went wrong, and how can we as Detroit?
It's a great question. Here's one of the key things. I'm putting these ideas out in the atmosphere, and you guys do it. I've only got a certain amount of time in life. Let's take the issue. How can you preserve these opportunities? Let's take the issue of land. Okay. Dayton, Ohio, Youngstown, Ohio. The municipality does not own 70% of Dayton, Ohio. Private investors do. The city of Detroit has, 70,000 houses? I mean,
Vacant lots. There's actually a difference.
You have a municipality that owns giant segments of neighborhoods, right? An empty lot, the going rate with the city is $300. $300 for a vacant lot. Okay. So what are you going to do? You're going to build a house? How are you going to do this? How does this work? Let's step back and look at it from the community side. You go back to the 19th century and you look at a guy like Henry George, who wrote an extraordinary book called Progress and Poverty. Henry George contended that the creation of wealth in this country was fundamentally related to the private ownership of land. And that when we allowed the private ownership of land to come into effect, and he was living in San Francisco working as a letterpress operator at the time, he saw that once land was privately owned, some people became very wealthy, but other people became poor. That the private ownership of land created that poverty. So there are a lot of different things to think about that. When we talk about how do we preserve these opportunities in Detroit, land trusts. Everyone thinks a land trust is some, the Berkshires, beautiful mountain forestry, all that sort of stuff. Let's do an urban land trust. And here's how it works. We go to the city, and we say to the city, we as a community group in whatever area we're in, we want to buy 100 vacant lots in our community to put into a land trust. The city's thrilled to have these things off there and back on the tax rolls. And then you make a deal like this. For every property that we build there that is a rental property, the rental property will pay $100 a year to the land trust for the use of the land. If a property is ever sold, there is going to be a built-in margin of $1,000, whatever the number is, that goes to the community land trust. So how does that look in over the long term? If you have real estate people that know how to develop and know how to do things even in a basic way, what you have is a community that is using its most fundamental basic resource, which is land. It's using that resource to build its own wealth. So that if you did this in any neighborhood, Highland Park, please, it's a great idea for Highland Park. You have a community being able to administer its own resources to help be a player in its own financial destiny, instead of relying upon a municipality that is operating on a mechanism that hasn't been relevant for at least 30 years. Sorry.
No, so I'm
sorry, let me just
go
say one
ahead.
thing.
Go ahead.
So preserving the opportunity. If you have a community that owns a community land trust, and your community feels that your community should be pro-local business and pro-entrepreneurial activities, then when the time comes that Meyer wants to put the store in Corktown, if the community land trust owns the land and they don't want big box stores, then they're not getting a big box store. These are the kinds of long-range planning things that can be done in the city.
Sort of
right now.
mechanisms to
That's
built
right.
in.
You know, I kind of want to come back to something that we try to work with our entrepreneurs on, and that's, you know, fundamentally understanding all the ecosystems that are at play and influencing your business. One of those huge, that hugely impact people is the political winds, how they blow. You know, tax credits that are here today, gone tomorrow, things like that. But we work with them to make sure that they are not building their, you know, their business success is not contingent on what could potentially be a short-term issue, a la, you know, film incentives, right? I put a $50 million studio on the ground, didn't look like such a good idea anymore, you know, or whatever it may be, so.
Thanks, Rick Snyder.
But again, you know, it's about building a business that is resilient to all those things. So it's not relying on that one, you know, it might be great for the first 3 years of the business in the city because they're incentivizing it, but is that a sustainable business model if that gets taken away? And, you know, I hear your point about larger understanding of development plans and all that, but I think, again, when we get back to the core seed of building a business, it has to be something that's resilient to change because that's always going to be a constant. We're always going to be going all over the place.
Well, and you need to make a place sticky. And so, you know, to your point about talent and, you know, can I rely that the talent is going to continue to be there? It's not just any one thing that will drive whether or not the talent will be there, you know. Having the anchor institutions, having a CCS or Wayne State or any of these other institutes of higher education is part of that ingredient mix. Having a flourishing retail base, you know, where people don't have to feel like they have to leave for basic necessities is part of that. Having affordable housing options. We had this summer between 40 kind of mid-career professionals coming to Detroit as part of this Detroit Revitalization Fellows program. The Venture for America folks bringing in young business school graduates or undergraduates to work in Detroit businesses, and you know, just, you know, and the Live Downtown, Live Midtown programs. There actually wasn't enough quality rental housing within kind of Lafayette Park, downtown, and midtown to house these people, and you had waiting lists at places, and so. You know, that doesn't work. Like, that doesn't work for the stickiness piece. People can't find quality places
You
to
know,
live.
you know, this is a really funny thing. This sounds so simplistic and whatever, but I promise you, in my own life, this has been true. What is what's sticky? What makes an employee want to stay with me versus somebody else? Have fun. Be a fun person. Don't be a jerk to your employees. People care about these things. And in my life, what's funny is no matter what kind of insane venture I'm going into next, I have a group of people who know that A, I'm not crazy about risk, that I'm a very sober, cold eye on things, and that if they're going to come along with me, it's going to be fun.
Yeah, and I think this talent or lack of talent thing is quite a misnomer that, you know, going back to Scott's point about the media, it's not all a quantity thing, it's a quality thing. And I think there is immense quality in the talent that's finding Detroit right now and the people that want to stay there and build something, you know.
Yeah.
A guy like the guy sitting next to me who decided to come here a year and a half ago, and we're seeing that all over, whether it's in large companies, people kind of coming home, or just hearing the calling in whatever space it may be. You're going to find very quality candidates. You know, there's not going to be 50,000 of them, but there'll be a few dozen or a few hundred, whatever you need. They're going to be there.
And they'll have a great diversity of experience, whether they're homegrown or have come from somewhere else, or you know.
Just to conclude, the challenge is you can find a dozen, but if you're going to sell a business plan to someone else who's going to invest, where are you going to find the next 100? So, but anyhow, appreciate it.
You've got a hand up back
Circle
there.
this, yeah. I wanna-
Thank you.
Sorry.
I want to have a better idea of what the retail or strategy may be for downtown. I have a little bit of an understanding of what's going on in Midtown Detroit, you know, with the whole Invest Detroit, and I saw that pop-up, you know, store they had with Somerset.
Right.
Is there any kind of plan or idea maybe for, you know, small entrepreneur retail pop-up even strategy?
That's what we're trying to do in our building.
Okay.
Please call me. I'm surrounded by white guys. Like, I need assistance here. Guy, and it's like,
Match made.
it's like all these white guys, I'm like, guys, Now they mix it up with ribs.
So the vision for downtown retail.
Thank you.
Oh, and I'll get you a card.
I don't believe in cards, but I'll email you all my stuff.
Got it.
Yeah, so the vision for downtown retail is about unique retail options that you can't get in other places in the region. Downtown really has to be not just the city's downtown, but the region's downtown. And that would, it'll probably be, there's a lot of changing circumstances right now, given the different folks buying up real estate. So we're working with them, we're working with the Downtown Detroit Partnership on really rolling out a retail strategy. But the key is the Woodward is the spine, and it's not about the Gap. I mean, the Gap someday, sure, but it's really about what's going to create a destination and have a level of quality and appeal that is really going to bring people from all over the city, but also all over the region to want to come and shop there. Because if we're just redoing the mall, it's not going to work. And I think testing pop-up in Corktown, in Lafayette Park, Midtown, honestly, South Mall, Livernois, at East Warren. I mean, I think there's a lot of places where, pop-up retail could really work if there was a landlord that got it and wanted to work with folks. And we'd like to try to do something on a test basis in Lafayette Park as well, because it's also about giving entrepreneurs an opportunity to kind of show off what they can do. So they can then attract, some of the investment, other stuff that they need. Thank you. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I'd like to know more about the triple bottom line.
Okay. So as we're building businesses, we're trying to incorporate how do you measure that, so the three components of that are going to be, economic sustainability, environmental sustainability, again, be a good steward of the resources that we're using. And then the third piece of that is community, which is very in town. It's fluffy. How the heck do you measure community? But that has proven to be the biggest part of what we're doing. As we look to grow these businesses, the community that gets engaged around them, the community of folks that come together, the healthy entrepreneurs, the community as a whole in Midtown growing and thriving, because of all of this going on. So it's really how do we get these guys focusing on all those things. So, as a banker / MBA / whatever, the historical way you analyze a company is you're going to look at just the bottom line. You're going to look at the number, right, of whatever it may be. What's the contribution margin? Can they make money? When we analyze things from a triple bottom line perspective, that's just 1 square in a 9 square grid, in essence. So we're analyzing how does this company play with, how does this company impact the community, how does the community impact it? And we'll go through and analyze that relative to that company, their customers, and their suppliers, and kind of see where this company is benefiting, in all those, or in as many of those quadrants as possible. So it's a more holistic approach, but it's also, though, it's common sense. You think about who are the successful businesses in your town. It's the ones that have been good citizens. They've kept their employees because they're nice guys and they're fun to work with. And again, they're better stewards of their resources on a go forward. And they, by the way, have a business plan that works, or a business model that works and is profitable. So really, when we're talking about that, it's bringing common sense back to it. But it's something we kind of got away from in our world of spreadsheets and bottom lines. Did that help? I hope that answered it.
Yes, sir.
So we've all talked about the opportunities that are present here in the Detroit area, and we've danced around a little bit of some of the challenges, but I'd like to hear from each of you what you think the top 2 challenges are for Detroit in order for it to come back and for it to be meaningful again. And I guess, and what can we do to affect those?
So the boring challenge is how do you get real estate values up where every deal doesn't require some kind of incentive or subsidy or tax break. Because it doesn't matter if you're a manufacturer that's been in the city for 20 years, you're bringing on a new product line, you're probably going to go get a personal property tax abatement, or if you're trying to rehab an abandoned building downtown, conventional bank financing for the vast majority of projects doesn't work. And we just can't, we gotta get out of that cycle.
Okay.
So that, I think, and frankly, the foreclosure crisis has just eviscerated single-family home values. So how we kind of get out of that cycle, I think, is a huge challenge. And I think lots of people are working on different possibilities, but that's a huge challenge. I think the second piece is kind of how, can we truly get to a common vision for the city and march forward on a path? Because the city's current footprint and the way services are distributed and the low density development in many areas is unsustainable. And I think the key isn't so much, can you come up with a plan? It's, lots of people can go and draw up plans. The question is, I think, can we truly get community support and the community buy-in and a real community vision, one vision for what the plan is? And I think we'll see that over the next 6 or 8 months.
Yeah, to me, I mean, it really goes back to the human perspective. I mean, in many ways, there's great things going in downtown and midtown and places like that, but the rest of Detroit is kind of a human tragedy. And I do a lot of work in the schools. Got to fix the schools. If you talk about one huge thing, we need to figure out that problem. I spend a lot of time working on that. We also need to figure out again this sense of community. For too long, guys like me turned our backs on the city. We drive into our offices, drive back home, didn't engage in trying to build that community, and not just this community of entrepreneurs, but how do we engage in the neighborhoods? How do we try to move this system forward and be good stewards of our community? I think if we can figure those things out, those aren't easy fixes, by the way, but everything we do in Midtown and downtown is great. But if we don't figure out those two things, the city as a whole is not going to thrive.
Well, not to pick on you, I think the number one challenge that the city faces, apart from education, which is a paramount crisis in this country, I think the fundamental challenge that has to be overcome is for people to stop asking negative questions. I can't tell you how many times I go to people to talk about an idea of something that I want to do, and these people tell me it can't be done, it won't work, can't happen, well, yeah, we're going to see how this goes. So whatever. These are things many times in business that I've done dozens of times, deals that I've done over and over and over again, that I know I can do with my eyes closed. Suffering the economic war that the citizens of the city have been subjected to for the past, 40 plus years, have, it couldn't help but leave very deep scars and really psychic disturbance. I mean, you wouldn't be a human being if you weren't. But there is nevertheless a really prevailing atmosphere of negativity and impossibility when it comes to embracing any challenge, and we got to lose that. It's time to get to work, people, and we're going to make it happen, and if it's going to happen, it's up to us. Nobody's going to help.
Take one more question before we...
I was just wondering if you guys could touch upon a couple of groups, if you have any experience with them in regards to the community building and networking that's happening in Detroit, specifically TEDx Detroit, and also the Southeast Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, because you hosted an event for Garage a couple weeks ago, didn't you? Just a couple resources that maybe everybody should know about and become involved in a little bit to help foster the community you guys are talking about.
Not sure about that. I'm sure we did host that forum there. I wasn't a part of it, but I'm sure we did. There's just a multitude of avenues to get engaged, and it's just about, the great thing about Detroit right now is if you show up and care, you're going to find yourself at tables that you wouldn't be at in other communities. You find yourselves on boards or deeply engaged in investment decisions. So it's more about finding out what drives you and then connecting to somebody, people of like mind, because you'll find there'll be a seat at the table. It's wide open. So I don't know what again, it's not a great answer, but
A nice place to, and I think we only have 1 minute left, a nice place to go if you just don't know anything about Detroit, and given that the Free Press and the News don't always report all the stories that are happening in the community, modeldmedia.com is a really great resource. Every week there are new stories about grassroots things that are happening, businesses that are opening, all focused on the city of Detroit, and it's a good starting point to give you a taste for what some of those groups might be.
Or you know what I do? I sit at Forant, or I sit at University Brew Works and talk to people. And, but there's a few places in town where everybody seems to kind of coalesce, and those are a couple of them. And you'll find some pretty cool people
Park
with some
bar.
cool things, park bars and other ones. So find your watering hole.
I'm not a joiner, so I respect all these organizations. I'm sure they do good work. I just am not a group person. I just do things on my own, so I can't really say. But I'm a resource, Scott at ramscale.com. Want to talk? That's where to find me. So happy to be of help in any way that I can.
We'll have the panelists available for a few minutes afterwards if you have questions, you want to talk to them one-on-one, but I'd like to thank them for their